Ricky's a little bit quiet. Can you guys see my screen?
Yeah, we can see.
Okay, great. Yes. Rick, you there? Rick, we can't hear you if you're talking. Rick, we still can't hear you. Okay, Rick says he's dialing in. I guess he's having some issues, so.
Quick sound check. You're able to hear me okay?
Yep, loud and clear.
All right, perfect. Perfect, Matt. Thank you. So, gentlemen, thanks a lot for joining. First of all, on part of SUG Chennai, I want to especially thank both Kore and Rick for making this call. In fact, Kore has been one of our first presenters for SUG Chennai, and back then he promised to come back within the same year with one more session. So, I just wanted to especially thank him for this wonderful session, and without wasting any time, I'll pass on to him so that we can take it forward from there. Thank you, mate.
Yep, thank you. It looks like Rick's still having some problems, but I'm just going to go ahead and get started anyways in the interest of time. This is an interactive session, so I've got 3 URLs up here on the screen. I asked that everybody on the call participate. Each one of these URLs will take you to a demo site that we built in JavaScript services. So if your favorite genre of music is country, go to the jss.ma/country URL. Rock, go to the one in the middle, or R&B, go to the one on the right. Fill out that form. It makes the presentation a little bit more entertaining and gives some context around some of the things that we're doing. So I'll give you guys about a minute to do that. I'm going to start the stopwatch now, and hopefully that'll give Rick time to get his microphone situation sorted out.
Is this better?
Yes, it's great.
Okay, good.
Just in time.
Yeah, I saw that. Thank you. I heard you all the time. It was just so. Thanks for having us. Sorry, I'm late, guys. Was trying to find some of the settings, but it wasn't letting me do that on my machine. But we're good.
Yeah, it's okay. No problem. So I'm going to give the audience about 30 more seconds to fill out the form and play around with the site. Okay, this is last call. If you want to participate, and Rick and I would both really appreciate it, go to one of these URLs while we talk. Okay, JavaScript services and marketing automation. Presenting today will be myself, Corey Smith. You can find me on Twitter at SiteCorey. I am a solutions architect at Proficient Digital here in the United States in Atlanta, Georgia. And I'll be presenting today with the JSS Gold Master, Rick Bauer. Rick?
Every time. I'm going to take that off the slide. Corey's the JSS Gold Master, and he knows it. I am Rick Bauer. I am a SiteCore strategist MVP. I have been a marketer for the bulk of my life. You can find me on Twitter at SiteCordial, and both Corey and I work for Proficient Digital.
Yeah, and I forgot to mention that I'm a SiteCore MVP as well. Don't want to forget that. Okay, JSS and marketing automation. So this is a presentation that Rick and I gave at SiteCore Symposium in October. And really, this presentation is all about making you, the audience, feel more comfortable about building your websites using JavaScript services. So on the marketing automation side, you're not going to see anything new. If you're really familiar with marketing automation, this is the same great stuff that you're used to with SiteCore. What Rick and I have done is we've built out a site, which you guys hopefully just interacted with, that really showcases the fact that if you use JavaScript services to build your sites going forward, you don't lose any of those great marketing automation, personalization, A/B testing, any of those great features that you love in SiteCore. Anything to add on to that, Rick?
Yeah, it also doesn't really extend any features from a marketer user sense, but the result is a stunningly fast native feeling, native based rendering, and that you can feel the speed instantly. That was a very surprising change from what I was used to. So it still feels like SiteCore, but just a little amped up. So it's very good to work with.
Yep. And speaking about renderings, before we really dig into JSS and JavaScript services, we should talk a little bit about the history of rendering engines in SiteCore. So if you've been doing SiteCore for any amount of time, you may remember XSLT, which was really kind of the first rendering engine in SiteCore. Nobody except for one guy in New Zealand uses this today. Then, of course, there's web forms, which was very popular until recently, like within the past 5 or 6 years, I'd say. Hopefully, you're only doing maintenance on this. You're not building new websites. And then, of course, MVC, right? So this is what everybody is hopefully building their websites on today. I gave a presentation to you guys about this a couple of months ago. So MVC is really the way to go. But there's kind of a common thread between these three. At the end of the day, they're all server-side rendering engines. So even though we prefer MVC, I mean, it doesn't matter if you use web forms or XSLT, the delivery method of content is the same. SiteCore is generating an HTML document on the server, sending that HTML document up to your browser, and then your browser is just rendering that HTML. And that served us really well, but over the past almost decade, there's really been a movement away from this server-side rendering paradigm to client-side rendering. And that's where frameworks like Angular, Vue, and React come into play. As Rick mentioned, client-side rendering is a lot faster. In your browser, it feels a lot snappier. It feels a lot more native. You can really tell the difference. If you take a site that has been built using server-side rendering techniques and have that exact same site side by side with the same site built using some client-side framework, you can really feel the difference. And honestly, I think that this is the way that your site should be built 2018 going forward. No compromises. I think that whereas today we're saying, hey, don't use web forms for any site you're building, God forbid you use XSLT, I think that within a couple of years we're going to be saying the same thing about MVC, right? Don't build your sites using MVC anymore. You need to be building your sites using JSS, leveraging Angular, Vue, or React. And these three frameworks, they come with feature parity. So it doesn't matter which one you choose. It's really more about what you're comfortable with or which one you want to use. For that site that you guys just navigated to, I used React to build it. No particular reason. It was really fun to use React, but if you use Vue or Angular, you're not going to sacrifice anything. So if your shop is an Angular-based shop, pick that and build your sites using Angular. The other kind of big implication, other than just being able to build more fast, modern-feeling sites, is that we're going to start changing our team compositions a bit. So today, whenever we're going and looking for a new Sitecore developer, if we can't, to join our team, if we can't find someone who's got Sitecore experience, kind of the next best thing is a .NET developer, right? JSS kind of turns this on its head, and we don't need necessarily a .NET developer anymore with JSS. Now we can start kind of broadening our search to find individuals who have front-end experience with React, Vue, or Angular, and they're going to be able to bring just as much value to the platform as someone with .NET experience. I think that's really exciting. It's going to bring some fresh new perspectives to how to build websites. And it's also, for us as developers, going to open us up to a whole new community or a whole new set of communities that we may not be involved in, right? So just the React and the Angular and the Vue communities themselves are bigger than the Sitecore community. So now that we're going to be able to start leveraging these frameworks, we're going to be able to start getting involved there and kind of see what cool things they're doing. And kind of the killer feature in JSS that makes all of this possible is something called disconnected mode. So right now, front-end developers really don't like working with Sitecore a lot of times because generally they like working on Macs, right? Sitecore requiring the .NET framework, if they want to do their work on a Mac, they've got to set up a VM and probably work in Windows. But disconnected mode is something that JavaScript services ships with that removes that dependency on Sitecore itself. So you can actually build websites against a node server that kind of mocks Sitecore, the output that comes from Sitecore, and you can build a really rich prototype of your website that's fully functional and content-driven without getting Windows involved at all. So your front-end developers can work directly on their Macs. They could work on a Linux machine. Frankly, any operating system that will run Node.js, they can do their development there. They don't need Sitecore anymore. And again, they're going to be building completely functional sites. They're not static wireframes. And these sites, once they've built them, can actually just be imported as is into Sitecore. And your content authors can start entering content right away. It's pretty cool. Anything to add to that, Rick?
No, I mean, just the only thing that I would add is just, I want to go back to the kind of like the JSS pool of hiring. You just got to make sure that the developers that you're, hiring are still like not just HTML, CSS developers. You definitely need, one of those JSS disciplines you need to add. Look
Yep.
for that kind of personnel when hiring. So, but no,
Yep.
that's great.
Absolutely. And I think one thing I'd add on to that is, a lot of us doing Sitecore today aren't familiar with those frameworks. To be honest with you, before I really got started on this presentation, I didn't have experience with React, and I was able to pick it up pretty quickly. React is a pretty simple framework. I think if you've got MVC experience, it's pretty easy to pick up. And like I said, it's a lot of fun. So don't get scared about this kind of paradigm shift that you're going to kind of be left behind. They're all really easy to pick up. There are lots of great tutorials on it online. And again, I just think it's really fun. I had a lot of fun using React. It's a bit different than MVC. Another thing that I do want to touch on with disconnected mode, as I mentioned, in disconnected mode, you're actually building against a node server instead of Sitecore, and that node server is mocking mocking the response from a Sitecore server. With this node server, you've got some interesting implications. So that website that you guys hopefully just interacted with is actually running on Docker. So JSS opens us up to entirely new architectural possibilities when building out our Sitecore infrastructure. You can start running your website on Docker containers very easily, for example, and instead of kind of scaling out your CDs. So I think that's pretty neat. But without further ado, I want to hop into a demo of disconnected mode and kind of show you guys what that looks like. So you can see here on the left, this is the website that you guys just interacted with. However, this isn't running on Sitecore. This is running in disconnected mode. So I hope you can see this, but you can see it's running on localhost 3000. So this is running on a node server. And over here on the right, I've got Visual Studio Code open, and this is just running the Sitecore React sample app. So JSS has 3 sample apps that you can use to kind of get started with your websites. There's a sample app for Vue, there's a sample app for Angular, and there's a sample app for React. And you know, you hear out in the Sitecore community, Habitat is just an example. Never use it as a starter kit. These are starter kits. Everybody says use these as starter kits. There's no shame. You can tell your friends about it. Kind of the expectation is whenever you're building a new JSS site, you're going to start from one of these sample apps and kind of make them your own. So here on the right, you can see this is just kind of the React sample app that I've put this content into. And I don't have time to really go into depth about what's going on in all these folders. There's a lot of interesting stuff here in source I'd like to talk about. But if you really want to get kind of a deep dive and have someone explain that to you, fellow MVP Jean-Francois Leroux from Cobeo has a video that you can check out on YouTube. Just go look for JSS and Helix. That's a presentation that he gave at Symposium as well. And he goes way into depth about what's going on in all these folders. So again, get on YouTube, just look up JSS and Helix. You'll find this video.
I popped the link into the
But as I said, thanks, Rick. So as I said, whenever you're working in disconnected mode, you're not building a static HTML site, right? You're actually building a content-driven site. And without Sitecore involved, you need items somehow, and that's where these routes come into play. So when you're working in disconnected mode, there's really no concept of an item. You're working with routes and kind of the JSS lingo. And these routes are just YAML files. So if you've worked with Rainbow, if you've worked with Unicorn, this is exactly the same format that's used by those. And no surprise, the guy who developed Unicorn and Rainbow, Cam Figge, he's on the JSS team. So that's where this came from. But these YAML files basically simulate your items. And you can see that this routes folder kind of looks like the content tree in Sitecore. So this en.yaml, this is the English version of the home page right here. And then under that, I've got a rock page. And under the rock page, I've got a survey page. Under that, I've got an R&D page with a survey page, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So this is kind of how you build out your content tree. What we'll do is we'll just take a look at the home page really briefly. And you can see, upon further inspection, that this looks a lot like an item. It's got an ID. Now, the ID is not a GUID because working with GUIDs is not fun. So you can actually make your ID strings, and this works fine. Your home page or your home route can have fields on it. Right, so if you had a page item, it'd probably have a page title. That's where these fields come into play. And then where it really gets interesting is with your placeholders. So on this page, I've got a header placeholder, a main placeholder, and a footer placeholder. And you can see in the header and in the footer, I've got just an ID that I'm referencing. So, whenever you're working in Sitecore, if you've got some shared data sources, like in SXA, basically anything that's under that data folder for your site, you can easily use shared data sources here as well. So I'm just referencing this ID for the header, this ID for the footer, and for example, the footer is exactly the same across all pages. So just using the same ID there on every page. But again, just want to show you guys that this is content driven. So we can go here and I can say, good evening, Chennai, change this. I'm going to hit Control S to save. And then through the power of hot reloading, bam, you can see that the content in the site gets updated immediately. So this is pretty sweet, right? You can't develop that quickly in Sitecore. So if you've been doing Sitecore for any amount of time, you know that whenever you make changes like this or any kind of structural changes, you're going to have to wait a couple of minutes for Sitecore to restart. This is really fast. This is the fastest possible way to prototype your sites and build out custom components, and it's really great. But it's got its limitations. So this node server, it's not going to do everything that Sitecore does. The really cool bits that Rick likes to get involved with, like the marketing automation, personalization, et cetera, that's not going to be available. So eventually you're going to have to go from your disconnected mode site where you've kind of got all this stuff built out and you feel like your site's in a good place and you're ready for content authors to start getting busy with it and your digital strategist to start setting up the marketing automation and all the cool stuff. You can actually do an import from disconnected mode to connected mode, and that'll take all of this content that I just showed you and push it into Sitecore as items. And then once you're in connected mode, you can start doing all the cool stuff that Rick's going to talk to you about. So, Rick, take it away.
Thank you, Corey. I hope everyone can hear me all right. I'll just try and speak up here.
Again.
So, yeah, okay, great. I'll go with that assumption. Thanks, Corey. So, again, everything that, Corey has built, is still going to lead back to the marketer using Sitecore as the tool set that we're used to. And there are a set of best practices. And so where Corey's talking about the backstage pass, if you will, for our little concert series here, he's showing you kind of what all the construction looks like. I'll show you kind of that front end, that stage view, if you will, of the entire process for the marketer. But there's still best practices that we need to adhere to as well. And the expectation is that these work. So, and everything that Corey has built with using JSS does work as expected. So let's just touch on a little bit of the journey and where you've been, for those of you, and hopefully all of you have participated in this, our microsite. But you came in to the site via one of those links that we provided on the initial screen, and tied to that initial link is a campaign ID. So when you initially showed up, you'll have this Sitecore campaign ID appended to the end of that URL. And that is how Sitecore can start tracking you and start gathering implicit data. So we still don't know you. We still are just trying to tie pieces together a little bit about our users. And so one of the ways initially is to tie together some campaigns and build some and use those URLs to drive traffic to the site. On top of those campaigns, we can add, you want you to open the campaigns just to show how easy that is. We can have different groups of them. For the same campaign, I may have one that is different genres, different, one could be email, one could be Twitter, one could be a PPC campaign. And then on top of those campaigns, we can add marketing taxonomy, and that's that taxonomies folder that you see in the marketing control panel. And those get plopped into these classification zones here where you can basically have channels and you can start to really round out, like if you want to basically do a type of event or a region or any of these items, marketers can build these out. What you're seeing here on the left-hand side is largely out of the box. They're built out where I added in these events and did that. But those are basically, I call them tags, marketing tags, but they're different events, and you can see that we have Akshay in as one of the possible events. So should we ever be invited to Akshay's house to present, we will use that facet. So, so that's what we gathered. And in that little second, that you came to the site, we already have an idea of what drew you to the site, so we have some information about you. Now we want to move that, and because what that's doing is that's driving custom analytics. That's driving analytics in your individual profile and at kind of a high level profile. But we need to take that to the next level. So you got to this page and you saw the option to tune up your guitar in this case, because it's country, and you were presented with this form. So that's all great. And if you've worked with Sitecore 9, the new form builder is fantastic. It's drag and drop. It's a very beautiful and powerful tool, except at this point, and we hope that this changes soon, it is not compatible. It doesn't work with JSS. So Corey had to then take over his magic and start backstage again, building out some more scaffolding for us to be able to use forms. Corey?
Right. Yep. So as Rick mentioned, there's no Sitecore form support in JSS yet. It's in development, but with the version of JSS that ships today, no Sitecore form support. So a lot of the cool things that we're really used to getting out of the box with Sitecore forms and may take for granted at this point things like custom submit actions, triggering a goal, or triggering an outcome whenever you submit this form, you're going to have to do that yourself. I kind of want to talk to you through some of the challenges that we ran into whenever developing these forms. You know, it shouldn't really scare you. Developing custom forms isn't that hard. React, Angular, Vue, they all have some really nice libraries that make building forms pretty easy. And the form that I built here using React, I just used vanilla React. I didn't use like a custom library like Formic or anything like that. It was pretty easy. But the thing that Sitecore really needs whenever you're doing these form submissions, if you want to do any kind of personalization, is the analytics cookie. So whenever you're working in MVC, the way that you emit that analytics cookie is using this HTML helper, right? And this is going to basically detect whether the visitor is a robot or not. And if they're not, it'll emit the global analytics cookie to track your behavior and identify you for personalization. Now, when you're working in React, there's a component called, unsurprisingly, visitor identification that you put in your layout, and this serves exactly the same function as that HTML helper. Angular and Vue, they have very similar components, slightly different name. But honestly, if you're using those sample apps that I was talking about earlier to start your site from, you really don't have to worry about it because the visitor identification components are put on the layouts by default. So it's just worth calling out that this is there. But again, if you're using those sample apps, it's not something that you're really going to have to worry about. One thing that you do have to worry about, though, is whenever you're taking data from a form. So this is just kind of a sample method of what it looks like taking data from a form. You can see I'm using an API controller, right? So I built this form controller using Web API, not MVC, just to kind of prove the point that MVC is not needed. We can start building our sites using just JSS. Don't get the MVC bits involved at all. But the key thing whenever you're posting form data is you always want to be identifying the users, right? By default in Sitecore, anonymous users aren't indexed, so they don't show up in the experience profile, and they don't really give a lot of value to your marketers. So you should always be striving to identify as, like I've done here in this method, but there's a trick to it. So it seems like this should work, and it will identify the user by their email address from the form, but only if, when you're submitting the data from your JSS app, you include this. So I'm using the fetch API here to post the data back to the form and post the data back to the controller. Another popular library to use in JavaScript these days is Axios. And it's going to suffer from the same problem. By default, Axios and Fetch do not send cookies when posting data back to the server. That applies to a post, a patch, a put. It doesn't matter. By default, just assume that Fetch and Axios are not going to post data back to the server. And this will cause headaches. Rick and I spent a whole Saturday trying to figure out why, whenever he was submitting the form, none of the personalization was taking an effect after he was browsing the site. And it was because I didn't know about this. I left the credential same origin line off of my fetch request. So again, just keep this in mind. Make a mental note. If you're ever using the Fetch API, if you're ever using Axios, make sure that you go and include this in your fetch request, or in your request credential, same origin. This will ensure that cookies get sent over the wire and that the personalization works as you expect. Next, CSRF attacks, so cross-site request forgeries. This is a website vulnerability that used to be in the OWASP top 10 security vulnerabilities that's published every few years. It's fallen off because a lot of frameworks now come with some kind of mitigation for CSRF attacks. I'm not going to go into the details just because we don't have time of exactly how a CSRF attack is executed and what that looks like for your site. But if you've been working with MVC, you've probably seen this HTML helper, the anti-forgery token helper, right? So you add this into your form. This will send an anti-forgery token cookie to the user's browser, and it'll also put a hidden input field in place of this HTML helper. And then whenever your users submit the form, on your form controller, for example, in MVC, you can add this validate anti-forgery token action filter, and this will basically make sure that that cookie and that hidden form input are present whenever the form data is posted, and if not, it won't accept the request. And that works great to mitigate against cross-site request forgery attacks. However, JSS doesn't have an equivalent of this HTML helper. So take a screenshot of this URL. This will take you to my blog. I've actually blogged how I've tackled this. You can use what I've outlined here in my blog. It'll work just fine with that validate anti-forgery token action filter that I just showed you guys. It'll also work with web APIs, Sitecore's web API action filter as well, to protect against CSRF attacks on your web API controllers. So check that out. Really a solution for anti-forgery tokens in JSS. Last but not least, Rick, you want to tell them a little bit about GraphQL?
Well, yeah, I'll tell you, the JSS documentation says that this is the world's best select language, select statement, I should say, and, Corey found this to be wonderful when querying APIs. So.
Right. Yep, so as Rick said, the JSS docs call GraphQL the world's best select statement. It's not SQL, it's GraphQL, so you're not actually writing SQL with it, but this is really the way forward for APIs. There's a lot of buzz about this in the Sitecore community and the development community in general, so we're really fortunate that this has been baked into JSS to start giving us experience with it. But I want to talk about one of the problems that it solves. So don't take notes, don't pull out your glasses. What is on this slide doesn't really matter. What does matter on this slide is the volume of data. So on the left side, let me back up. So whenever you submitted that form, as I talked about, when you hit that submit button on the website that you guys interacted with earlier, that triggered a goal and an outcome. Now, again, with Sitecore forms, there are custom submit actions that you can use to trigger the goals and the outcomes. We had to implement that custom. So on the data source for the music form, I've got two multi-list fields. One of them allows Rick to select which outcomes he wants to get triggered, and the other multi-list field allows him to select which goals. Whenever the layout service, whenever Sitecore sends to JSS this data source information, this is what ends up getting sent to your browser for each outcome and each goal. So on the left side, this is one outcome. On the right side, this is one goal, and that's a ton of data. I as a backend developer, don't need any of this data almost to actually trigger the outcome and the goal. The only thing I need for each of those is an ID. So this is not good, right? This is sending way too much data to the browser. It makes the site feel a little bit slower, and it also leaks details about our implementation that we don't want outside users to be able to get a hold of, right? Like, I don't need anybody to know which image Rick chose for the goals, or I don't need anybody to know what the monetary value we associate with an outcome internally. That stuff shouldn't get leaked to the outside. And with MVC, there's a solution, right? In MVC, before you send data to your view, you can do some manipulation of that data with your controller, and you can remove the bits of data that you don't need and map it to a view model. But with JSS, there is no controller anymore. So GraphQL can kind of step in and serve that same function and allow you to reshape data that's coming from Sitecore to your JSS app very easily. So you can see here that I was able to use GraphQL to reduce all that data down to just the stuff I need for each outcome and goal, which is just those IDs. So let's hop over into Sitecore, and I will give you guys a quick demo of what that looks like. Okay, so we've got the content editor open here, and just again, to kind of give a bit of context, we'll go to the R&B page. We need to go to the survey page under the R&B page. And the survey page has a music form data source. And like I said, on that data source, there are goals and there are outcomes. And it's just a multi-list field that allows Rick to select which goals and outcomes he wants to get triggered when you submit the form. So the rendering for that is here under renderings, JSSMA. We've got the music form rendering. And the one thing I'll point out is you'll notice that we don't have a controller rendering here. This is actually a JSON rendering, right? Because you're going to be returning JSON to the browser instead of HTML. This isn't a controller rendering, which is a bit different than what you may be used to. But with JSON renderings comes a whole new section on the rendering. And if we scroll down, you'll see it here, GraphQL. So you can specify a GraphQL query to execute for this rendering and kind of reshape the data. So the really cool thing about it is if you don't know GraphQL, it's not really a big deal because Sitecore comes with a GraphQL browser that you can use to kind of play around with the data from your data source. So we need to provide a little bit of context to this query. So it requires a data source and a context item. So we'll just go select those from Sitecore right now. For the context item, we'll select the survey page. Paste that there. For the data source, we'll select the music form path, put that there. Now we should be able to execute our query and see what the response would look like to our JSS app. Now I've got the experience editor open in another tab, so it's emitting a bit more data, but we'll scroll down and you'll see down here, here's the goals and the outcomes for the data source, okay? And the really cool thing is that in this browser, you can very easily see which bits of data you can change, right? So if for each of these goals, you know, instead of the target IDs, I wanted to get the name of each of the goal. I can, as you see here, while I type, I'm getting IntelliSense. So under goals, instead of target IDs, I can select target items. And then under target items, I can select exactly which bits of data I want. So if I wanted for the goals, I could select the ID, I could select the name, I could select the display name. And now whenever I run this query, you'll see that this is the data that would get sent back to my JSS app now instead of just the IDs. I can get for each of my target items, the ID, the name, and the display name. So that's pretty cool. And again, you can almost think of this, not quite, but almost think of this as a controller for the layout service and for Sitecore when you're working in JSS. It's pretty cool. There are a lot of really interesting possibilities beyond just morphing your data on your renderings, and I think this is really neat. So get excited about this. But the reason that we were doing all this, again, is to enable the marketers, right? I wanted to be able to enable Rick to start doing some cool stuff with the data while you guys are submitting the form. And Rick's going to talk to you a little bit about some of the things he's able to do with that data. Rick?
Yep, thanks, Corey. I mean, just, you know, you're seeing the goals and outcomes and IDs and everything that Corey's building. It's all to start to gather data. So again, let's look where we've been. I'm just going to recap. You were given a campaign ID. You were given a URL that had a campaign ID attached to the end of it, and that drove you in. You took a little bit of a journey, and you filled out a form now, and you can see there's quite a bit of work to get forms doing what we needed to do and protecting our users from that. But ultimately, we're building out data, and that's going to show up in not just the high level analytics in Sitecore, but also, you know, kind of its underplayed up, you know, sibling, but basically the probably not the right word to use in this environment to be saying sibling, but I mean, you're going to get the experience profile. So the experience profile is where we can start to really drill down and see more visitors. It looks like we got 4 participants in this. So if we can just pick on somebody, you'll start to see that you've built a timeline, you've triggered an outcome of, you know, a marketing lead. We're able to start to see different profile information, visit information, and also visit information. You'll see goals that were triggered, patterns that were matched. So there's a lot of information just quickly through gathering information, you know, by going through it, all tied to your name. Normally with Sitecore, there's also a rather boring gray silhouette that comes in the photo there on the right-hand side, but by working with, you know, being able to tie this together, Corey was able to match those patterns and those goals and everything to somewhat of an image. Now imagine this connected to a CRM and a salesperson needing to use this. They'll have a recognizable face perhaps, but if they don't have the face, they also have the little robot that you're seeing. And Corey, why don't you just touch on that briefly?
Right. So no, there's no service out there that's free anyways that's going to let you look up somebody's picture by their email address, right? Like I showed you before, whenever you identify a user from a form, generally that's going to be by their email address. Facebook's not going to let you do that. They're not going to let you say, hey, give me an avatar for this email address. LinkedIn's not going to let you do it for privacy reasons. But there is a service out there called Gravatar, where you can go and you can tie an avatar to your email address. And yeah, a lot of services use that, like WordPress uses it to get your avatar based on your email address. And I'm using it here as well. So it looks like we don't have anybody that's got Gravatar set up this morning. But the cool thing about Gravatar is that if you request an avatar for someone for an email address that doesn't have an account there, there's actually a setting to have Gravatar generate a completely unique image for that email address. So Sujita's got a totally different image than Vasanta. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing names. And you can see that this is totally different and this is totally different as well. So each of these images is going to be totally unique for an email address. And, you know, it's not really that big of a deal, but if you worked on the experience profile before, you know, it kind of gets a little boring just seeing that gray silhouette everywhere. So that's just a really easy integration you can do whenever you're identifying your users to kind of spruce up the experience profile for your marketers.
Yeah, and you're right. It's not critical, but it's just a feeling of completeness, you know. So this is again something where it's not just the browser-facing users; it's the people that are working on this content that are really your customers, and for them to see that information certainly helps feel like a complete solution. So again, I mean, we've gathered a lot of data in a little bit of time, but then where this goes a little deeper is, you know, look what we know in a minute, but then we're able to start to use and work with Sitecore's new marketing automation tool. And this is where you can really start to have a lot of power. In this case, we used it pretty much for some simple emails. So those of you that participated should have received an email by now. But all those best practices that I've been talking about, the campaign, the outcomes, the goals that Corey helped build out, are going to drive this tool. And this is where it can also drive personalization. And even this automation can be used to drive personalization and customer ranking and things like that. But on that start button, you'll see that we have a marketing lead on the lower right-hand side. You'll see a marketing lead outcome has been applied. So basically, once you got to that form confirmation page, we registered you as a marketing lead. And from there, we set you into the flow, and there was an initial decision. And really all this was based off of is when you came to the form, you had the option of saying, you know what, I want to change my mind. I'm just going to go and say from this point forward, I'm going to choose country, but wait a minute, no, I'm going to change my mind. So you have that yes, I'm indecisive button. All I wanted to do is add a little depth to the automation just to show what we could do potentially, and it's going to come down to your business rules. But in this case, we can manage that as a marketer here. So now I split that into two paths, whether you're decisive or indecisive, and then the rest of what you're seeing down the flow is identical on both sides of that split point. And that is, which genre did you choose, which main genre? So we sent an email out based on, did you choose rock, did you choose country, or did you choose R&B? And depending on what you chose, we will then send an email, and we'll also add you to a contact list. Now, don't worry, we are not actually saving those contact lists. You will not be added to an email blast or anything like that, but just, this was just for the demo purposes. And then ultimately, you'll move through the bottom. Now, excuse me, I could just put these emails in and personalize them, where I could have the genre personalized and do one path. And I could have this be a little simpler. But the reason I wanted to show this and split this off this way is because of the report view. And this is a very powerful feature to me as a marketer within the new automation, because I can now see where people are currently and have passed through in the automation path. And I mean, imagine now, this is 4 people. Imagine, 20,000, 100,000 people going through automation, because again, this is email. It doesn't have to be email. I can move people through, page visits that then provide some sort of goal or outcome, but I can constantly monitor, and it's near real time. You'll see those numbers changing as users move through. So very cool tool. I'm going to be blogging about this probably early next year, maybe the end of this year if I'm lucky, but I'll be doing a little more depth on the automation tool. So please follow me on Twitter and watch for that. But then, the core of this, again, as I said, was email. So we wanted to take Sitecore's capabilities one step further with JSS, and this was a bit of a stretch goal for us, and Corey certainly did not let us down. He was able to use JSS in conjunction with the Email Experience Manager, EXM. It is not necessarily legal with Sitecore yet, but we'll show you that here that, the emails that you're about to see were completely constructed, and I was able to build them out in the Experience Editor using kind of that full promise of what EXM and the Experience Editor are supposed to be. Corey, you want to show that?
Yeah, before we move on, I do just kind of want to highlight that my mind was blown whenever Rick showed this stuff off to me, like the reporting view. I mean, this is just so cool that Sitecore has some way that you can see this data live, right? Like, I mean, we know right now while doing this presentation that 2 of you chose, what is this one, rock, and then 2 of you chose R&B, I believe, and you were decisive. Nobody really clicked around the page. An interesting statistic that we've observed is most people choose rock whenever we're doing this presentation. It's just really fun being able to see that live, and even more fun whenever you've got like a live site running that's having hundreds, or thousands, hundreds of thousands even interactions a day, being able to see this stuff live. So that's pretty cool. But yeah, moving on to the email. So as Rick mentioned, I actually was able to build the emails using React. And using JSS. Now, again, I don't know that this is a totally supported scenario for Sitecore at this point. So if you're going to start working with JSS and you want to use it for your emails, you might want to send an email to Sitecore support and ask them if they're going to support it first. But it does work, right? So you can see here up in my toolbar that the React developer tools are lighting up, and that's because there's a React site or a React app active in here, and it works, right? So like all the components are completely editable. Rick was able to build the emails inside of here just as you would normally, right? Like type anything, it works. It's just, this is the Experience Editor, but it's running on top of a React app. And basically the way that this works is like this. If you've done any kind of email development before, if you've had that misfortune, you know that doing HTML for emails is not fun. It feels like you're writing HTML back in 1999, right? None of the features that we take advantage of and are used to today with like HTML5, for example, are going to be available in almost any, if any, email client at all. And you certainly can't run JavaScript in an email client. So that kind of throws React, that throws Angular, that throws Vue out of the picture. Well, not quite. So I mentioned earlier that all 3 of these are client-side rendering frameworks. They are, but the very first request that is ever made to a page whenever your job is served up to a user, that very first request, like whenever you go to jss.ma/country, that first request is always going to be server-side rendered. So an HTML document actually just came from the browser. As you click around the site, the subsequent requests that you make, those are not going to be server-side rendered. Those are totally client-side rendered. And basically the reason for that is SEO, right? Whenever Google's crawling your page, I'm not sure if Google's crawler is JavaScript aware or will execute JavaScript. So that first request around your website is always going to be server-side rendered to make sure that Google or Bing can properly crawl your site. And we can take advantage of that for emails, right? So whenever EXM sends emails, basically what it's doing is just requesting a page and then sending that HTML document as an email to your email client. And that's exactly what I took advantage of with JSS here, and it worked beautifully. Like Rick said, you should have received an email by this point. So that's pretty cool. But again, if you want to run with this on your applications, there's a new app that you're developing, check with Sitecore support if they're going to support this before you do it. Okay, let's pick a winner. Rick?
So this is one more use of Sitecore. We're going to export the data from the experience profile using XConnect into a console app that Corey built. I think the winners, the odds are pretty good. I think they're 1 in 4 or 1 in 5. So if only there were some giant prize, but happily there will be bragging rights for those of you. There will. Right. It's a only 26 people in our tour will win this honor of being picked a winner of our little demo. So, but this is again showing off a little XConnect. So it's just using JSS with Sitecore, using all the tools that are available for that completeness of experience.
Yep. So this is just going to run out to XConnect in Azure. This console app's going to, let's get it started. Select a winner from one of you guys. It's going to get all the people's information that participated. So we had 4 participants, as we knew. As Rick said, the odds are pretty good for you. So which of you is going to be the winner? Who knows? All right. So you can see those are the 4 people who participated. All right. A winner has been chosen. Who's it going to be? It's always so much fun. Here we go. Vasanta, congratulations. I am a fellow jazz fan, so I really respect your choice of music there. What we're going to do is we're just going to take a screenshot of this and put it on Twitter. I will black out your email address. Don't worry. I'm not going to share that with the world. But again, congratulations. As you conclude your evening tonight, you can just really be happy that you have just joined an exclusive club of JSS and marketing automation winners. So congratulations to you, and thank you for attending. Okay, let's wrap this up. So take a screenshot of this. Probably the end of this year, I will have all of the code that I use for this demo, including the Docker file to create Docker containers, the Azure build scripts, of course, the JSS app, the server-side code, everything I'm going to put up on GitHub. So take a screenshot of that. It'll be up later this year. I've got some time at the end of the year to work on that. So, yep, watch that space. A big thanks, Rick.
Yes, well, thank you, first of all, and foremost to you for hosting us and inviting us. It's been fun.
Absolutely.
I appreciate you spending your evening. We also just want to thank our team, always at Proficient Digital, for the support that they give us to not only let us build what we put together for Symposium, but to continue to present this out. It takes a little time, and we appreciate their willingness to work with us. And then we have, Corey mentioned something about Docker earlier. Corey, you want to talk about Raja?
Yep, so a friend of mine, Raja Ayapsetti, you can find him on Twitter, follow him there. He actually helped me do all the Docker setup and deployment. So a big thanks to him for taking the time to help me with that. That was really cool. Any questions? Let's see if I can open up the meeting. We've got some chat. Okay, that's just you. Anybody have any questions for us? Guess not. Silent group.
Man, I hope this was on.
So, yeah, I really nobody has got any questions. So.
Okay. Sure.
Okay, so
Corey
and Rick, on behalf of SUG, so you're saying something, Corey?
No, sorry, it was Rick. I was just saying, if something does come up, please reach out to us on Twitter. You know, if there's questions after the fact.
Yes. Okay, definitely. So, Corey and Rick, on behalf of SUG Chennai, I would like to take this opportunity to thank you for such a wonderful webinar. on JavaScript services and marketing automation. So we really appreciate and
Thank
definitely looking forward to many sessions from you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
Yeah, thanks for having us. Have a great night, guys.
You.
Thanks so much.
Bye-bye.
Yeah. Thank you. Bye-bye.